to it. The problem for many around the league is that Clark refuses to play the role expected of her.
The problem for many around the league is that Clark refuses to play the role expected of her. That one sentence, that right there is the entire story. That is the whole documentary in 11 words. And by the role expected of her, I mean the role of a white woman who walks into a predominantly black league, immediately prostrates herself before the court of public activist opinion, and spends every press conference apologizing for the audacity of being good at basketball. Caitlin Clark did not do that. Caitlin Clark showed up, shot from 35 feet, put 60,000 people in seats that previously held 1,200, and had the nerve, the absolute nerve, to just keep playing basketball. This is the story of a league that found its golden goose, looked that golden goose dead in the eye, and decided the goose needed to be punished for not reciting the right script first. And by the time we reach the 15-minute mark of this video, every single person watching is going to understand exactly who is engineering that punishment, exactly who benefits from keeping Caitlin Clark in the villain box, and exactly why the WNBA establishment is one of the most spectacular examples of institutional self-sabotage in the history of professional sports. My name is not important. What is important is what you are about to see. Stay with me.
Statements like that help explain why a player can drive her fist into Clark's neck, and reporters instinctively rush to defend the player who threw the punch instead of the player who...
Let us start with the scene that kicked all of this into the open, a CNN panel, a national television audience. A prime opportunity for someone, anyone, on that panel to sit down, look at the camera, and give an honest answer to a very simple question. Why do so many WNBA players display visible, and at times physical, hostility toward Caitlin Clark? Former ESPN host Carrie Champion was on that panel. And what did Carrie Champion do? She did not answer the question. What she did instead, and by instead I mean in the most intellectually cowardly move you will see on cable news this year, was argue that anyone who even raises the possibility of race being a factor is being disrespectful to black women. Let me say that again so it lands properly. She did not say race is not a factor. She did not say here is the real reason. She said, if you suggest race is involved, you are disrespecting black women. That is not an answer. That is a deflection wrapped in a moral accusation, designed specifically to shut down the conversation before it can start. I want you to sit with that for a second. Because that move, the move of saying your question itself is offensive, rather than answering the question, that is the entire machinery of this story in a single moment. That is what Caitlin Clark is up against every single day she puts on a jersey. Now here is the number that every person watching this needs to lock into their brain, because we are going to come back to it. The WNBA's own demographic breakdown, referenced directly in the reporting that sparked this entire discussion, puts the league at roughly 70% black or LGBTQ. 70%, that is not a criticism, that is a business context, because when you are a league that is 70% one demographic, and your single biggest commercial asset, the one player who moved the needle on attendance, on television ratings, on jersey sales, on national media coverage, does not fit that demographic, and refuses to perform ideological loyalty to it, you have a structural tension that the league has absolutely zero interest in resolving honestly. That is the business problem. And the WNBA establishment, and by the WNBA establishment I mean the media apparatus, the activist commentators, and the players who have absorbed their messaging, has chosen to resolve that tension not by protecting the asset, but by punishing her for existing.
Caitlin Clark has chosen a different path. She's a basketball player. That's all she's ever claimed to be. She never volunteered to become a symbol in America's culture war. She never volunteered to spend press conferences validating racial activists or apologizing for her own success.
Now let me show you how the punishment system actually works, because it is not random, it is not chaos, it is a system with rules, and those rules were laid out in plain sight for anyone willing to look. Here is the rule. If you are a white player in this league, you have two options. Option 1, you get ahead of it. You acknowledge your privilege loudly, repeatedly, and publicly before anyone asks you to. You make it part of your personal brand. You signal, clearly and often, that you understand the assignment. If you do that, the WNBA establishment will embrace you, the media will adore you, and your path through the league will be smooth. Option 2, you just play basketball. You let your game speak. You do not perform ideological loyalty. You do not beat the drum. You simply show up, compete, and treat the sport like a sport. If you do that, you become the wrong kind of white person, and the WNBA establishment will make sure you know it. Cameron Brink chose option 1, drafted 1 pick after Caitlin Clark in the 2024 draft. White, blonde, engaged to a man, and by every conventional measure the kind of player who would generate the exact same resentment Clark generates, except she did not. Because before she played a single WNBA game, Cameron Brink was already on record saying, and I am quoting directly from what was reported, "I will acknowledge there is a privilege for the younger white players of the league. And then in May she said it again. I've tried to be vocal about this and acknowledge that there is such a privilege marketing-wise, being white and blonde. She said it twice before the season started. She passed the audition. The WNBA establishment practically reveres her. Paige Bueckers occupies the same space, presented constantly as Clark's counterpart by sports media. Zero visible resentment from players, zero sniping from the press. Why? Because Paige Bueckers went on record expressing concern about the racial makeup of WNBA coaching staffs. She said the league was built on black women, and it is right for them to have equal opportunity. She said the right things. She got the stamp of approval. Now I want you to think about what this actually means from a pure business standpoint. Because this is what is fascinating, and by fascinating I mean genuinely catastrophic for this league's long-term financial health. The system is not designed to reward performance. It is not designed to reward the asset that generates revenue. It is designed to reward ideological compliance. And Caitlin Clark, the one player in this league who moved the commercial needle more than anyone in the league's history, simply refused to play that game. She is not anti-anyone. She is not hostile to anyone. She is a basketball player. That is all she has ever claimed to be. And in the post-George Floyd media environment, that posture alone, just being a basketball player and nothing more, is apparently enough to make you a villain. If that is not the most absurd sentence you have heard today, I do not know what to tell you. Now, before we go further, if you are finding this breakdown valuable, and I think you are, because you are still here, please subscribe to WNBA News and hit that notification bell. We cover this league without the spin, without the agenda, and without the deflections that Carrie Champion specializes in. Hit subscribe right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it means everything to this channel.
The privilege. The drama surrounding Caitlin Clark has never been difficult to understand. A straight white girl from Iowa transcended the game of women's basketball. She put the sport on the map. They hate her.
Let me give you the analogy that makes all of this click, because sometimes you need to step outside the sport to see the sport clearly. Imagine you own a restaurant. Your restaurant has been operating for nearly 30 years. It has a loyal core clientele. It has a strong identity. It has a culture, but for most of those 30 years, it has been, let us be honest, a financial struggle. The margins are thin, the seats are not always full, the brand has never quite broken through to the mainstream. Then one day, a chef walks in, and this chef is extraordinary. This chef is so good that people who have never heard of your restaurant start showing up. Lines form outside. National media covers it. Your reservation list goes from empty to booked out weeks in advance. The revenue this chef generates is not comparable to anything your restaurant has ever seen. She is by every measurable metric the reason your restaurant is finally on the map. Now, what does a rational restaurant owner do? You protect that chef. You build around that chef. You make sure that chef is comfortable, supported, and wants to stay. What does the WNBA establishment do? They let other chefs elbow her at the prep station. They let food critics write columns about how the restaurant would be just as full without her. They let the front of house staff mutter under their breath every time she gets a good review. And when a customer complains that someone physically shoved her in the kitchen, the restaurant's PR team rushes out to explain why the person who did the shoving had very understandable reasons. That is not a metaphor. That is a documentary. That is what happened.
To it. The problem for many around the league is that Clark refuses to play the role expected of her.
Statements like that help explain why a player can drive her fist into Clark's neck, and reporters instinctively rush to defend the player who threw the punch instead of the player who took it. Let that breathe for a moment. Let every single person watching this actually absorb what was just said. A player physically assaults Caitlin Clark, and the media's first instinct is to defend the aggressor, not the victim, the aggressor. And by defend, I do not mean give context. I do not mean explain the competitive heat of the moment. I mean actively, immediately, reflexively reach for a framework that makes the person who committed the assault the sympathetic figure, and the person who took the hit the one who somehow needs to check her privilege. That is the no-win trap Caitlin Clark is locked inside. When she plays physically, she is called too aggressive. When she absorbs a hit and keeps playing, she is told her white privilege is protecting her. When she succeeds commercially, she is told her race is the only reason. When someone physically attacks her, she is told she had it coming because of structural advantages she never asked for. There is no version of this where she is allowed to win, and that is not an accident. That is a feature, not a bug, of the system the WNBA establishment has built around her. Now let us talk about the architects of that system, because this does not happen organically. Someone has to keep pouring fuel on this fire, and the transcript of what is actually being said in public is damning. Jemele Hill, a commentator with a massive platform, significant credibility in sports media circles, and a long track record of framing sports stories through a racial lens. Jemele Hill went on record saying, and I want you to hear this carefully, we would all be very naive if we didn't say race and her sexuality play a part in her popularity. Now, here is the part that should make your head spin. The same media ecosystem that produces that quote, the quote that says race is the reason for Clark's fame, will turn around and tell you that anyone who says race is the reason for the hostility toward Clark is wrong, is being divisive, is disrespecting black women. Jemele Hill can say race explains her popularity, but you cannot say race explains the hostility toward her. One direction is allowed, the other direction is forbidden, and by forbidden I mean you will be labeled, dismissed, and shouted down before you finish the sentence. That is the double standard, that is the machinery, and it runs 24 hours a day. Let me bring in the business frame one more time, because this is where the self-destruction becomes impossible to ignore. Remember that number, 70%. The league is roughly 70% black or LGBTQ. That is the demographic reality of the WNBA locker room. Fine, that is what it is, but here is the business problem that number creates when you weaponize it against your biggest commercial draw. The audience that Caitlin Clark brought to this league, the new audience, the audience that filled arenas that were previously half empty, the audience that drove television ratings to levels the WNBA had never seen, that audience does not look like the locker room. That audience is largely mainstream sports fans, people who watched Clark at Iowa, people who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives and tuned in because they wanted to see what this woman could do. Those fans are not going away because they want to. They are going away because the league keeps handing them reasons to. Every time a pundit frames Clark's popularity as a racial artifact rather than an athletic achievement, you lose some of those fans. Every time a player elbows the golden goose and the media rushes to explain why the goose deserved it, you lose some of those fans. Every time Carrie Champion goes on CNN and refuses to answer the actual question while implying that asking it is an act of disrespect, you lose some of those fans. And those fans are the commercial future of this league. That is not hyperbole. That is not me hyping this up. That is simply the math.
Statements like that help explain why a player can drive her fist into Clark's neck, and reporters instinctively rush to defend the player who threw the punch instead of the player who...
Caitlin Clark has chosen a different path. She is a basketball player. That is all she has ever claimed to be. She never volunteered to become a symbol in America's culture war, and that right there is the core of why the WNBA establishment cannot stand her. Not because she is hostile, not because she is provocative, not because she said anything inflammatory, but because she is normal. She is a basketball player who wants to play basketball, and in the post-2020 ideological climate that the league has baked into its identity, normal is the most threatening thing you can be. Think about the framework that was being pushed hard in 2020 and beyond. The distinction between being not racist and being anti-racist, the argument pushed by figures like Robin DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi and amplified by sports commentators like Emmanuel Acho, was that simply not being racist was not enough. You had to prove it. You had to actively perform anti-racism, you had to signal, constantly and loudly, your ideological alignment, and sports commentator Bomani Jones took that framework into the sports world directly, suggesting that white people could be presumed racially biased until they demonstrated otherwise. Now I want you to think about what that framework means for Caitlin Clark specifically. Under that framework, Clark's silence, her refusal to perform ideological loyalty, is not neutral, it is suspicious, it is evidence of the wrong kind of whiteness. Cameron Brink screamed from the mountaintop, "I acknowledge my privilege." Paige Bueckers signaled her alignment. They passed the test. They got the approval. Clark said nothing. She played basketball. And under this framework, that silence is treated as guilt. It is like watching someone get arrested for not confessing to a crime they did not commit, while the people who confessed to the same crime get released. The confession is not about truth, it is about submission, and Caitlin Clark has not submitted. And the WNBA establishment has not forgiven her for it.
Caitlin Clark has chosen a different path. She's a basketball player. That's all she's ever claimed to be. She never volunteered to become a symbol in America's culture war. She never volunteered to spend press conferences validating racial activists or apologizing for her own success.
The drama surrounding Caitlin Clark has never been difficult to understand. A straight white girl from Iowa transformed the game of women's basketball. She put the sport on the map. They hate her for it. And yet the players have made it clear they would rather remain stuck in obscurity than ride the wave created by a player more concerned with basketball than grievance-based social messaging. I want you to sit with that sentence, because that is the most damning indictment of the WNBA establishment in this entire story. It is not that they dislike Caitlin Clark personally. It is that they would rather have the league remain what it was, underfunded, underattended, undervalued, than accept the commercial transformation she represents, because that transformation came without the ideological packaging they required. That is choosing ideology over economics. That is choosing the feeling of cultural control over the reality of financial survival. And by financial survival, I mean the league's ability to pay its players better, expand its footprint, land bigger broadcast deals, and become the kind of professional sports property that actually competes for mainstream attention. Let me bring back that number one final time, because it is the clincher. Roughly 70% of this league is black or LGBTQ. That demographic reality is not the problem. The problem is that the league's media apparatus has weaponized that demographic reality to build a cultural purity test that the league's single biggest commercial asset failed, not because she did anything wrong, but because she refused to perform a loyalty ritual she never agreed to perform. And the result? The most commercially transformative player in WNBA history is treated as the villain of the league she saved. Reporters defend the people who hit her. Commentators explain her fame as a racial artifact. An entire CNN panel refuses to honestly answer why a player who generates this much revenue, this much attention, this much growth for the sport, is being received with physical hostility by her own peers. That is not a sports story. That is an institution in the process of destroying itself. And every single person watching this video can see it happening in real time. Here is my verdict. Caitlin Clark is not going anywhere. She is too good, too commercially valuable, and too beloved by the audience that actually showed up. The WNBA establishment can continue running the purity test. They can continue rewarding Cameron Brink and Paige Buchers for saying the right words. They can continue letting Jemele Hill tell the world that Clark's popularity is a racial artifact. They can continue having Carrie Champion dodge questions on CNN. But the math does not care about the narrative. The arenas that filled up when Clark played were not filling up because of ideology. They were filling up because of basketball. And the moment the league decided to make Clark the enemy instead of the engine, they started a countdown clock on their own relevance. The prediction is simple. If the WNBA establishment does not course correct, if they do not protect the asset, if they do not shut down the media machinery that frames Clark's success as something to be resented rather than celebrated, the new audience walks, not all at once, gradually, game by game, season by season, until the arenas look the way they looked before she arrived, and then the same commentators who spent 3 years explaining why her popularity was just white privilege will spend the next 3 years wondering where all the fans went. That is not hyperbole, that is a business projection. And it is the most predictable outcome of the most avoidable self-inflicted wound in the history of women's professional sports. 70%, remember that number. Because the league that is 70% one demographic just spent 2 years trying to run off the player who made the other 30% care. And by the other 30%, I mean the mainstream sports audience that was watching for the first time and needed exactly 0 reasons to stop.
The privilege. The drama surrounding Caitlin Clark has never been difficult to understand. A straight white girl from Iowa transcended the game of women's basketball. She put the sport on the map. They hate her.
Here is what I need from you right now. Drop your honest answer in the comments below. Forced choice, yes or no. Is the WNBA establishment deliberately making Caitlin Clark the villain because she refused to perform ideological loyalty? Yes or no? That is it. That is the question. Put your answer in the comments right now, because I want to see where this audience actually stands, and I want the people running this league to see it too. If this breakdown gave you something to think about, and I believe it did, subscribe to WNBA News right now and turn on all notifications so you do not miss the next one. We are covering this story as it develops, and the next video is going to go even deeper into the machinery behind all of this. You do not want to be the last one to know, and click the video on your screen right now. It connects directly to what we just broke down, and it is going to keep you ahead of every narrative this league tries to run. This is WNBA News. We'll see you in the next one.